Okay, thank you. Okay, it's now, what is it, Thursday, 16th February, and we're about to start the Cabinet meeting. Quite a long agenda today, but it probably will be quick because the fact most of the debate will take place in probably 2 or 3 weeks' time when it comes up before the full council. So I'll move for apologies for absence. Looking out there, I don't see any apologies. Second is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on 24th of January. I'll move those. Seconded. We agreed? We are agreed, thank you. Declarations of interest? None declared. Thank you very much. Forward plan, Democratic Services Manager. That's the next item. All right.
Just for noting, Chair.
Just for noting, okay. Right, we're going through it today, aren't we? Right, 5. Alison, you can keep us going for a while, and that's on prudential Treasury indicators, Treasury Management Strategy, Statement 23-24. Thanks, Alison.
Yes, thank you, Leader. This report seeks approval for the annual update of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and the Prudential and Treasury indicators. As you all know, the Treasury Management Strategy provides the framework for the management of the Council's borrowing, for its capital plans, for its investments and cash flow management, and the control of the risks related to those activities, whilst enabling the achievement of optimum performance that is consistent with those risks. So CIPFA did publish updated Treasury Management and Prudential codes in December of 2021, with full implementation required for 23-24. You may recall that we implemented many of the requirements last year following a soft introduction of the codes, and now full implementation of the required reporting changes is reflected in the TMSS for next year. The Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities is also proposing to further tighten up regulations around local authorities' financing of capital expenditure related to investments in commercial projects for yield, and has already closed access to PWLB the Public Works Loans Board facility for borrowing for such schemes if they're included in your capital programme. And so similarly, the main objective of the updated CIPFA codes was to respond to the major expansion of local authority investment activity in recent years on the purchase of non-financial investments, so particularly property related, and that's been done to reduce the potential risks to financial sustainability that can be present in such investments, particularly when they're funded by borrowing. You will recall that in recognition of those potential risks in commercial property investment, the Council did actually withdraw from its commercial property investment strategy before the launch of the new codes in 2021. And I can confirm that no investments have previously been undertaken under that strategy, and we don't have any plans to undertake any investments of that nature going forward. So therefore, the TMSS presented today reflects those code requirements, and the required prudential indicators represent only investments related to service expenditure. But in recognition of the new code requirements and changes to the Treasury Management indicators, I do plan to arrange some member training during 23-24, so that you all get properly up to speed on those requirements. So turning now to the detail of the report, the Treasury Management Strategy covers 2 main areas: capital matters and Treasury management issues. In terms of capital, paragraph 2.1 on page 25 details the proposed capital expenditure plans across the medium term, the level of borrowing required to support those plans, which stands at just under 6.6 million for the 3-year programme and another 1.6 million for the following 2 years. And the full suite of prudential indicators demonstrate that those plans are affordable and sustainable in terms of the impact on the revenue budget. The costs of borrowing are fully reflected in the Council's medium-term financial plan, which is an item later on the agenda. There is one new prudential indicator to point out that's been adopted this year, and that's the liability benchmark indicator, which is a risk management tool used to measure the authority's net borrowing requirement, with a minimum requirement to project this indicator for the next 3 years. There is also guidance for a graphical presentation over 10 years, so that's been recommended in guidance, and we will complete further work on that to introduce that in the new year. So you'll see that indicator at paragraph 2.1.3 currently presents negative net loans requirements. So effectively, we've got Treasury investments in excess of our borrowing for the next 3 years, and that comes primarily from additional cash balances that we hold at the moment. So at paragraph 2.2 on page 29, we have the proposed minimum revenue provision policy, which sets out how the council will make prudent provision from the revenue budget to repay long-term debt, and we do that across the life of the asset being financed. There is no change to the proposed method from that used last year. Total MRP is estimated at £794,000 for next year, and that's included in the revenue budget. So turning now to Treasury-related matters. So that includes our borrowing strategy on page 33, and our annual investment strategy and required suite of Treasury indicators. The annual investment strategy on page 35 sets out the Council's investment priorities, which are, as always previously been, security first, liquidity second, and yield comes in third. So it determines the type of financial institutions that the Council can use for investing surplus cash balances over the coming year, and it maintains the same strict controls that the Council has operated over recent years. So by adopting this framework, we're setting out the minimum standards acceptable by the Council. In practice, all investments will be made with financial institutions of the highest rating. Investment returns, you'll have seen from the quarterly monitoring, have been increasing this year, and they are expected to remain higher next year, so adding an additional £170,000 of investment income to the budget compared to the original estimate for 22-23. And you'll know that's due to the higher bank rate, which is currently sitting at 4% and is expected to rise up to 4.5% by June. And then they're expecting it to start falling back by the end of the financial year. And so the Treasury indicators set the limits on our borrowing and investment activity to ensure that they're both affordable and prudent, and they're also detailed in Appendix 1. So I'll leave it there, Leader. Recommendations are set out on page 17.
Alison, any questions? Any questions, Michael? Do you want to? No. Okay, then I'll move recommend. Sorry, David.
Sorry, it's not a question. Thanks to Alison for this, which again is a sensible and prudent framework. I just wonder if I was the only one that found it ironic on page 19 that the Department for Levelling Up wants to tighten up its regulations on capital when they've been told by the Treasury to stop spending until they get their act together. I think it's a bit of doing what they say and not what they do. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll move straight to that vote on page 17, which is the recommendations there 1 and 2. I'll move those. Seconded? Seconded. We're agreed. Thank you. Moving over to item 6, which again is the capital programme, capital investment strategy.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So this report outlines the proposed capital investment strategy together with the capital programme and the resourcing of that programme for the 3-year period, April 23 to March 26, and also the indicative 2-year programme for April 26 to March 28. In terms of the capital strategy, the main aim is to outline the principles that shape our capital investment decisions, given due consideration to both the risks and rewards of capital investment options, to deliver a programme that's both affordable in the longer term and contributes to the achievement of the Gedling plan. So as detailed, as I've just set out under the previous agenda item, the new edition of the Prudential Code was released in December 21, and whilst the revised reporting arrangements could be deferred until 23-24, we did move to adopt most of the changes last year. So the key purpose of the changes, as I've already said, is to reduce the risks in capital investment decisions, and I can confirm that the capital investment strategy detailed in Appendix 1 complies fully with that Prudential Code. So turning to the proposed programme, Starting with expenditure, just as a reminder, capital expenditure doesn't neatly fit into one financial year usually, as projects have a lead-in time before any expenditure is committed, and this does involve sometimes reprofiling of budgets into future years. As you've seen in the quarterly monitoring reports that are presented to this committee each quarter. And you'll see a number of those capital projects totaling £683,000 have been carried forward already into 23-24, and they're included in the capital programme and are detailed in the table on page 66. In total, this 5-year capital budget is 17.1 million. So it remains ambitious despite the financial constraints that we face, and it has 5 main aims. So firstly, we continue to focus on our regeneration priorities, building on the successes of redeveloping the Arnold Market site and delivering improvements at Carlton Square. So we intend to build on those with the implementation of a range of projects that are contained within our investment plan and supported by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And also with the proposal for land assembly to support future economic regeneration master planning work, which will be subject to the development of a business case to support that. Secondly, we propose to increase our current programme to improve the provision of social housing through the acquisition of properties to provide improved quality and more cost-effective temporary accommodation. Further work is also underway in respect of the provision of affordable housing in the borough, including at Burton Road and Station Road, which will be subject to a report to Cabinet in the near future for consideration of a business case for that detailed scheme. Thirdly, we will continue to target support for our residents with the inclusion of the Disabled Facilities Grants from the Better Care Fund that we receive. Fourth, we propose to continue and increase our commitment to carbon reduction initiatives, including additional funds for a green lung walking route. We also have the San Martin Bank being carried forward at the Country Park, and we have use of external grant to provide home upgrade grants, as well as work for our own buildings to improve energy efficiency, for example, in the maintenance and replacement of the windows in the Civic Centre. Finally, we plan to invest in maintaining, as normal, in replacing the council's assets, such as the vehicle fleet, parks and play areas, to support our ongoing delivery of the Gedling plan. So turning now to capital resources, the council does not hold capital receipts in reserve. Instead, we use them to finance capital expenditure as the receipt arises. This strategy was approved as part of a previous budget and still applies. In terms of the financing of this programme, capital receipts of £0.8 million will be applied across the term, and that's mainly the final next year, where we've got the final stage payment from the sale of Teal Close coming in. We also have £8.1 million available from capital grants and contributions. Mostly that's related to disabled facilities grants, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the home upgrade grants. And we have just a minor sum of £21,000 from revenue reserves to support the programme next year. So that does leave a shortfall of £8.2 million, which will be funded from prudential borrowing. And whilst that's deemed both affordable and sustainable, it is subject to the council delivering its planned budget reduction programme, as outlined in the General Fund budget report. So together they'll provide the resources that we need to fund the capital programme that's outlined in the report. So I'll leave it there, Leader. The recommendations are set out on page 63, I believe.
Thanks, Alison. Any comments? Michael?
Yeah, just to thank Alison and the team for putting together the capital programme. Obviously, they've worked closely with officers across departments, but also with the Cabinet as well. And I just wanted to pick out a few issues that, in spite of us being at the tail end of 13 years of Tory austerity, and in spite of the fact that the government has turned its back on Gedling and not given us any one-off funding from the Major Towns Fund, Future High Streets Fund or Levelling Up Fund, and that the council remains the 5th worst affected council in the country, this administration, this Labour administration, is still determined to invest in our communities. And I think the report very clearly in black and white, as a matter of fact, highlights future investment in CCTV, building on the investment that we've already made as an administration over the last decade, replacement of our vehicles, including transforming some of our vehicles to much cleaner technology to try and reduce our carbon emissions, investment in children's play areas on the back of the more than 10 children's play areas that we've already refurbished over the last decade, including investment in the Lamley Lane play area, and huge credit should go to Councillor Jenny Hollingsworth and Councillor Linda Pearson for the work that they've done there. A Sand Martin Bank bird hide being invested in to look after our natural habitat, but also money being invested in temporary accommodation to bring down the bread and breakfast bill to support those who are struggling with having a roof over their head or are homeless as a result of the safety net being pulled away from them as a result of more than a decade of Conservative government austerity, as well as investing in flood alleviation schemes in the Daybrook, which will protect residents around the Woodthorpe area, the Daybrook area, the Ernale area, and the surrounding Arnold Town Centre area. We're also investing in council street lighting, because there are a number of street lights that Conservative-run Nottinghamshire County Council have decided they will now not be maintaining, which run through some of our parks. The safety of people who use our parks, particularly women and children, is really important for this council, and that's why I'm proud to see that we're investing in improving those old sodium lights and making them much better. I know some of that work has already taken place, and something you leaders should be particularly proud of. This administration built the 350 plus acre Gedling Country Park. Wouldn't have happened without the councillors sat around this table in Cabinet and the Labour administration that's been in control at Gedling for the last 10 years. And the next phase of that is to extend the country park out to beyond Arnold Lane to Digby Park, to create the new green lung for Gedling and the nature trail that will take place there. And I know that's something you've championed over many years, John, and I'm really pleased to see that there is funding here to support that project. There's much, much more besides as well, but it demonstrates that in spite of the fact that we've on the tail end of 13 years of austerity, in spite of the fact that the government will not put its money where its mouth is when it comes to levelling up funding, in spite of the fact that they continue to cut our budget year on year, this council is determined to squeeze every single sinew of value out of every pound and penny in our budget and invest it to try and continue improving the place that we're proud to call home. And I think Alison and officers should be commended for what is an outstanding capital programme and an outstanding budget that will undoubtedly improve the lives of people who live in this area.
Thank you, Michael, for that positive feedback. Anyone else? If there's no one else, then we'll go straight to that vote. I'll move in favour. You seconded?
Seconded.
Agreed. Thank you. We're still with Alison. We're moving on to item 7, which is the other Wodger papers you've got there, and that's the general fund budget. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So, this report sets out the revenue budget that aligns to the Gedling Plan priorities for the next year and highlights for you the continuing financial challenges that Gedling faces, due both to the reductions in central government funding and also the downturn in the economy resulting in significant inflationary and demand pressures, which together present an increasing financial risk to the council's financial sustainability. In respect of government grant funding, you will recall that whilst there was a 3-year comprehensive spending review last year, CSR 2021, this wasn't accompanied by a 3-year local government finance settlement or by the promised local government funding reforms, namely the Fair Funding Review and the Business Rates Retention System Review, which were all deferred. So for the past 3 years, we've received one year only spending rounds. So whilst the sector has continued to lobby for a multi-year settlement for the final 2 years of the current spending review period, and also for the implementation of system reforms this year, these again haven't materialised in the local government finance settlement for this year. So that means we have another 1-year settlement for 23-24, though the government have now confirmed that the local government funding reforms will take place, won't take place until the earliest of 2025. So that means there'll be no change to core settlement methodology for next financial year, 24-25. And so whilst that does bring a degree of certainty for the next 2 years and confirming that there will be no reset of the business rates retention system, the further delay in the fair funding review, which intends to ensure that funding is based on relative needs within a borough, means that the disproportionate impacts of the current system will continue for at least the next 2 years. So that ongoing delay means that the council still doesn't have full clarity or certainty over how services will be funded beyond next year, and that presents incredible challenges for us in the development of a sustainable medium-term financial plan. So that's further exacerbated for us from this year, from the increase in demand and inflationary pressures that we are now experiencing. So the one-year final local government finance settlement was announced on the 7th of February. So that's made up of the settlement funding assessment and other key grants. And based on the government's assessment of core spending power, which also includes an assumption of maximum increases in council tax, but which are in fact determined locally here by the council, Gedling does now have the 5th largest reduction of all the councils in England compared to the last comprehensive spending review period in 2015-16. That's a slightly worse position than last year when we were with the 7th worst affected. And it is worth noting that only 10 councils have seen a reduction of more than 5% in core spending power, whilst 287 councils have seen an increase for the same period, with the largest increase for a comparable district reaching 33%. So that's a huge difference from our reduction of 8% next year. So for the 2 years prior to that, from 2020 to 22, Gedling were actually the worst affected council in England in terms of core spending power. And that marginally improved position is mainly due to our success in securing some new homes bonus based on the growth in number of new properties and empty properties brought back into use. So the award for next year for new homes bonus has been confirmed at just under £333,000. And that will be a one-year only award. And the future of new homes bonus does remain uncertain, but the government have now indicated that it intends to set out the future of the grant ahead of next year's local government finance settlement. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that before they do the fair funding review. And so whilst we've received the additional one-off award this year, which is positive, changes made to the homes bonus scheme over the years have had a significant detrimental impact overall on Gedling's budgets when comparing to what we received 6 years ago to now, where we've effectively lost £2.1 million per annum from our budget. As part of the settlement, the government has continued the new services grant, which it introduced last year as an interim one-off grant to recognise inflationary pressures, whilst completing the fair funding review. But in the absence of that review, this grant has actually now continued, but at a reduced level of £124,000 to reflect the reversal of the planned increase in national insurance contributions. In further recognition of inflationary pressures, a new grant has been introduced for next year. That's called the Funding Guarantee Grant. That ensures that all councils see at least a 3% increase in core spending power. It is noted as a one-off grant, and it's actually been funded by the repurposing of the previous lower tier services grant for borough councils. Gedling's funding guarantee is just under £350,000, which is offset by the removal of the lower tier services grant of £140,000, leaving a net increase of just £209,000. So like last year, there was no consideration of previous core spending power reductions, and that appears to benefit those more that have not previously suffered reduction in new homes bonus, even though legacy payment reductions would have been planned for by those councils. So in total, government funding to recognise inflationary pressures totals £334,000, but that doesn't come close to covering the inflationary pressures that we face. But On a more positive note, we have retained core business rates growth. That's forecast to increase from last year's original estimate by £500,000. So that's due to additional businesses opening within the borough and the system revaluation, which is effective from April of this year. However, we do expect much of that business rates growth to be removed with the establishment of a new business baseline when the system is reviewed in 25-26. So turning now to the general fund budget summary, detailed in paragraph 2.5, members will note the increase in net budget of £1.8 million. So as I say, that's mainly due to inflationary pressures, some of which were expected and some not. That includes the impact of the 22-23 pay award, which came in at an average of 7% and was 4% above our original budget, adding an additional ongoing cost of £550,000 a year. And the pay award for 23-24, we're now estimating at 5%, up from the previously forecast 2%. It's a cost of £775,000. And that's recognition of the likely continued upward pressure as inflation is likely to remain high through the most of the rest of this year. It is possible it could be higher. Employees' representatives have requested an increase of RPI plus 2%. So RPI is running around about 13% at the moment. So we could be in the range of a 15% pay award if that was successful. We've also got significant increases in our utility costs, over £700,000, and other inflationary pressures for fuel and software prices. In terms of past COVID impacts, we anticipate some improvement in our income next year, but don't expect leisure income to return to pre-pandemic levels until 24-25, which is also now being impacted by cost of living pressures, which is unsurprising. To manage past funding reductions, Gedling's been successful in developing and delivering its efficiency programme, which totals £7 million now since 2014, of which we've still got just under £500,000 still to deliver in the next 2 years. And currently that is progressing well, but we start to see more risks within that programme as we move forward. But you recall from last year's budget process that due to the uncertainties of settlement funding and the business rates funding and inflationary pressures, that we set an efficiency target of 1.1 million to be considered for delivery should those risks materialise. Well, those risks have materialised, and actually we're now asking for an efficiency programme in next year of £444,000, and that's detailed in paragraph 2.53 of the report. That's accompanied by a 10% risk provision of £50,000 to manage the inherent risks of delivery, and also a transformation fund budget of £50,000 to support the implementation. Given the financial position, only modest growth is proposed, and that's detailed at paragraph 2.5.4. So we've got 57,500 in next year, and that rises in the following year. And the most of that is related to a move to hydrogenated vegetable oil for our vehicle fleet as we move to implement our carbon reduction programme. A 5% increase in discretionary fees and charges is proposed for Cabinet approval, generating just under £150,000, and that's all detailed at paragraph 2.5.5. We have completed a review of the Council's reserves, as detailed in paragraph 2.5.6, and the minimum general fund balance is set at a minimum of £1 million, or 7.5% of net projected expenditure. So that's actually £1.064 million next year. The projected closing balance at the 31st of March is projected to be just over £1.2 million. So that's only £160,000 above our minimum balance, which starts to indicate the increasing risk that the Council is now facing. We have reviewed earmarked reserves, and in light of the financial challenges, we are looking to reclassify £300,000 back to the general fund balance to use if required, and we'll look at that in the light of the Council's outturn position as we move past the end of the financial year. The medium-term financial plan is presented in section 3. That's presented against the backdrop of uncertainty, as I've already outlined. The uncertainty of funding beyond next year and local finance reforms and the ongoing inflationary pressures in excess of £2 million. Council tax increases are proposed at 2.98% for next year, and the same assumed for the rest of the medium-term plan. This ensures that our increases remain below the referendum limit of 3% or £5, whichever greater, but of course increases are determined by Council on an annual basis. So based on the current information available, in order to achieve a balanced medium-term financial plan, a contribution from general fund balances is required next year of just under £1 million. And additional ongoing budget reductions or funding increases of at least a further £2.9 million will be required in the period 2024 to 28, and that's assumed in the medium-term plan, with 1.3 million of that required in 24-25. So whilst those plans are not supported by outline business plans at this time, given the backdrop of uncertainty and the fact that they're not required until year 2, it does allow us some time to develop those options for delivery if required, and we will be considering those early in the new financial year. So finally, as 151 officer, I am obliged to comment on the budget prepared, and I can advise Cabinet that the estimates are sufficiently robust, that we do have a level of reserves forecast at 31st of March 2024, which is what I consider to be professionally adequate, whilst recognising the increase in risks to sustainability that we face. So I'll leave it there, Leader. The recommendations are actually in the supplement pack set out on page 3.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks for you, your team, and all the hard work that goes into it. And you're probably having a holiday after this, are you? Oh, you just had one, all right. I feel like a cork bobbing up and down in the water. We're dropping below, coming back up. Somebody changes the rules and somebody moves the goalposts. Very frustrating. I think the figure that ought to be in everybody's minds, and if people who are listening or seeing this, look at page 7, look at the rate support on there, and look what we get today. And we're having to raise more and more locally. I know it's spent locally, but we're getting very, very little support now. And I can see that day coming along soon where we won't be raising, we'll have to raise all of it. And it's really frustrating because other areas, I'm sure somebody wants all sorts of different things and you see distributed out that they're getting, which seems a bit unfair when you looked at our levelling up bid recently, which cost us, I believe was it 50,000 to do the bid for that. The collective sum for the country was 27 million. What could you do with 27 million? It needs looking at. You need due diligence, but I do think we need to have a look at how we're spending this money. And you know, we're in this process. I do understand on levelling up there will be another one. Like you were saying, things are now being pushed to 25. It seems like the sinking ship of the Tories is going, and not unlike with respect to the people who were lost on Titanic, it's a little bit like that. It has started its decline and it's big, and it's being left for whoever takes over in the future. Anyway, thank you for that. Are there any comments, Michael?
Just, thank you, Leader. Just to thank Alison and the entire team, all members of staff who have contributed to, I think what is undoubtedly, in fact, I don't think this, I would say this hand on heart, the 12th year of certainly the Cabinet in this room, alongside Alison, putting together a revenue budget, the budget that underpins the services that people rely on day in, day out as residents in this borough. It has been the worst year, the most difficult year to put together a budget that maintains those vital public services that people rely on, but also keeps the council's finances in a sound position. And there are a number of reasons why it's been difficult. First and foremost, we are 13 years into year on year significant cuts to local government by this Conservative government. The best part of £16 billion has been taken out of local government over that period by this Conservative government. At the same time, they've forced council tax bills up by 15 billion. You only have to do the maths. That's £1 billion in the country adrift, and it's 15 billion of that £16 billion being funded by the taxpayer for cuts. So if you want to put me to put it straightforwardly, Leader, that is our residents in Gedling and the residents of the United Kingdom paying much, much more to get much, much less. The second reason is the disastrous mini-budget that Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, do you remember her, and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng presided over, which destabilised the UK economy. An earlier report Alison made reference to says that there is still unpredictability in the economic position for the country. And I have no doubt, and if you don't believe me on this, look at a number of eminent economists who will talk about the impact that that disastrous mini-budget that she presided over had on the UK economy. There are also then a pay awards to our members of staff, which they absolutely deserve for the hard work they're doing, but they are not funded by central government. There's Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, which has clearly disrupted supply chains and had a significant impact on public services and trying to put together a budget. Spiralling costs in utilities, not just because of Putin's war, but because of a government that seems reluctant to tax the war windfalls that utility companies have had. Centrica this morning, the owners of British Gas, 3.8 billion, was it, or more, record profits from a company that was forcing itself into people's houses to install prepayment meters without their say. And then finally, Leader, the other reason that I think this has been the most difficult budget to put together, it's been like knitting fog this year, is because we have a formula constructed by central government, and you and I have argued against this, Alison has argued against this, the Local Government Association have argued against it, you and I have sat in meetings with our local MP and ministers who have accepted the discrepancies. There is a formula constructed by central government that results in Gedling being one of only 10 councils that's lost money over the last 10, 13 years in terms of funding settlement, whilst 287 councils around the country have seen an increase. And I think if you're a resident like you and I are, paying tax, hard working, just wanting to see your area invested in, I think there's a serious question you should be asking of your local Conservative MP and of local Conservative councillors and of the Conservative government. How is it fair that Gedling is one of 10 councils that has seen a reduction in its overall funding over 13 years at the same time that 287 councils have seen an increase in their funding? I think we should just call it what it is. It's gerrymandering, it's unfair, it is not treating the hard-working taxpayers and families in Gedling in the way in which they should be treated, and we should call it out for what it is. It results in, reluctantly, this council having to ask yet again for residents to dip their hands in their pockets to make sure that we can protect the collection of bins, the swimming pools, the leisure centres, the beautiful parks and green spaces we've got, the children's play areas, the public protection work that we do, often to support our colleagues in the police in terms of investing in CCTV, the brilliant neighbourhood wardens that we've got. So we are asking residents reluctantly to dip into their pockets and contribute in terms of council tax. I think it's 7 pence per week we're asking for increase in terms of a Band A property, and I think about 10 pence per week in terms of a Band D property. What I'm proud of is that overall our level of council tax in Gedling remains the third lowest in Nottinghamshire, in spite of the pressure that's been put on us in government. We haven't shied away as a Labour administration. I remember being sat here 12 years ago, and not too far from where we're sat now, Leader, one of the Conservative councillors saying that Gedling would tax and spend and max out the council's credit card. Simply not true. We have never shied away of taking out money in the council that needed to be taken out. Just since 2014-15, we've stripped £7 million out of the council's budget in terms of savings and efficiencies. There's a further 2.8 million earmarked to be taken out of the budget. So where we think there is money that can be taken out of the budget, we will. But let's also be crystal clear. Every single pound and penny now that is taken out of this budget in this council is having a detrimental impact on the services that our residents rely on. Roads having to be swept slightly less than they were. Costs at the leisure centres having to be slightly higher than they were. Things not being done that perhaps would have been done in the past. And that is a direct result of reductions in our spending by central government and by having a government that will not stand up for the residents of Gedling. And in spite of all of that, it's a bit like standing outside with your umbrella up, because we're having to use reserves, that is the council's umbrella, to protect against an almighty storm that is raging down on us when you find that the storm's been created by your very own government. And that's what this budget feels like to me. But in spite of all of that, despite the fact that there is, roaring headwinds in terms of the pressure on the budget, despite the fact that it's pouring it down with rain and there's real pressure, Alison and her team have done an outstanding job in bringing forward a budget that balances, which is what we're required to do legally this year, and protects overall the frontline services that people rely on. In my view, Leader, and you would expect me to say this, the sooner we get a change of government, the better, because the facts in black and white speak for themselves. This government's formula, this government's view is never going to stand up for Gedling. They've accepted that Gedling has been poorly treated. The statutory Section 151 officers explained in the budget that we're the 5th worst affected council. We were the 2nd worst affected council. If we weren't increasing council tax this year, which they expect us to do, the Chancellor said it when he was on his feet in the House of Commons, I would put my money on as being either the worst affected or the 3rd worst affected, within the top 3 worst affected councils in the country. But the fact that we're asking our residents to pay slightly more means that we're the 5th worst affected. Nothing to be proud about, nothing to crow about. I think the government, I think our Conservative MP and our Conservative councillors should hang their heads in shame about the position that they've left Gedling in. But whilst that continues to happen, we will continue to argue for our communities. We will continue to make sure that the council sets a balanced budget, and we will continue to protect the frontline services that our residents rely on.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's a sample of what we'll get as an MP in another less than 2 years' time, where somebody's actually actively lobbying to get some funding for this area. And it's all factual. There's no fairy stories here. This is absolute fact. And it's most of it are in these papers or the papers that have gone previously. It's very, very frustrating because I've never seen anything so blatantly political. But anyway, anybody else want to make a comment? Everyone else is not making a comment, so you're asked. Now, just let me check with legal on this, because is this the one where we have to do a verbal one as well as the put hands up? Only the Budget Council, right. So we can move out. I'll move all 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 recommendations on page 3. Seconded?
Seconded.
We agreed? Thank you. So we're moving over now to item 8, which is the planning applications. You know what I think about planners, with due respect. Sorry? Oh, sorry, I better do that first. Yeah, it's the plan that got in front of me there. Yeah, item 8, the Gedling plan. Mike.
Thank you, Leader. So the Gedling plan is always presented alongside the budget, which enables it to be refocused if necessary and to respond to any changes in strategic priorities and budgetary factors. The previous Gedling plan covered a 3-year period, 2020 to 2023, and some examples of key achievements have been highlighted in the report at paragraph 1.6. These include the regeneration of Arnold Town Centre and the Marketplace, the works at Carlton Square, the provision of new CCTV cameras across the borough, investment in leisure parks and play areas, and the rollout of our carbon management strategy and associated action plan, to name just a few, Chair. This report presents a new draft Gedling plan for the period 2023 to 2027, which has been developed following consultation with members and senior officers. It has been produced to look and feel different this time, with a focus at a more strategic level. This allows for the detail to be delivered through the annual service plans, with review and challenge being delivered in the same way as normal through the quarterly performance monitoring reports, which come to this Cabinet, Leader, and published on the Council's website. At the year end, a detailed annual report will be produced and published, and that will document the Council's achievements and successes throughout the year, and these should be celebrated. The new Gedling Plan 2023 to 2027 presented an opportunity to refocus, check and challenge whether the priorities and objectives were the right ones, and it also gave the opportunity to reflect upon the views of the local residents as gathered through the Gedling Plan survey. The Council's vision is important as it outlines the long-term goals and aspirations of the Council for the future, and at the heart of this we continue with our strapline, serving people, improving lives. The Council's core values are what we stand for and the way we go about our business. These have been updated in this document to the following. We will be open, honest and trustworthy in the way we work, and we will make decisions in a timely way. We will clearly communicate and be accountable for our own actions and empower others with the skills to help themselves. We will respond to people's needs in a fair and consistent way. And we will strive to be forward-thinking and work with our communities, involving people in decisions that affect their lives, and be prepared to listen and take on new ideas. The Council's priorities have also been refreshed to focus on 4 high-level strategic themes, 3 of which are outward-facing, and the 4th is about the Council's operating environment. Theme 1 is economy, where we aim to encourage and support healthy businesses in our town and local centres, improving local skills and employment opportunities, and promoting an economy that attracts visitors throughout the day and supports leisure activity. Theme 2 is community, where we aim to enable a resilient, empowered, connected, inclusive and healthy community. Theme 3 is place, where we aim to enable a safe, attractive, clean and culturally vibrant borough that plays its part to tackle the climate emergency. And theme 4 is the council, where we aim to ensure the council is a healthy place to work for its staff, it engages with its customers, has a focus on improvement, is financially sound, as we've just heard in the previous reports, and ensures compliance with all relevant legislation. This is a very important document for the council, and I'll leave it there, Leader, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Questions? No. No, no. We'll move straight to the vote then. And that is, when I find it again. So we're asked to agree and refer to council for approval. Okay. Those in favour? Okay. All agreed. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to planning. Nigel.
Thank you, Leader. By background, Gedling determined in the region of 700 planning and related applications per year. Currently, applications are validated against the national list, which is limited in scope. The local requirements list will enable the borough to validate against our own detailed requirements. This will ensure that, that applications have requisite information when going out to consultation and will, as a result, improve the department's efficiency. The knock-on from this being we'll be in a stronger position to determine applications against prescribed targets, typically within 8 and 13 weeks. The full document is outlined in Appendix 1 on pages 117 to 172. Observations received on the consultation are in Appendix 2. One of the observations was the County Council, who noted that it didn't include the reference to the minerals plan, and this has now been inserted. Another concern was over the length of the document and its usability. However, whilst 56 pages long, on pages 2 and 3 of the document, you can click on the relevant page to go to the particular application of interest, for example, a householder application, rather than flicking through the whole document. It will, for example, highlight features such as the requirement for a flood risk assessment for a dwelling within a flood zone, without which the application would not be registered as valid. As a result, the local requirements list is considered to be a useful tool for the planning department to validate applications and improve efficiency, as well as a useful tool for agents and the public, providing clarity for those who submit applications too. We are therefore seeking the Cabinet's approval and adoption of the document as outlined on pages 113. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Nigel. It's not unlike the budget, the amount of work that goes into that. When people look, it's not 700 applications, it's 700, and look at the audit trail at the back of it. It's a bit like, I think I had 300 emails last week, and you know, some were a load of spam, others, but you've got to read them, you've got to look at them and try and understand them. And for planning, for such a small department, I think you do an excellent job. I joke about the planning officers because I used to be in the building trade, and it used to be always come along, hey, you've got to dig that a bit deeper. And I know my own footings at home were about something like 8 foot deep for a little extension, you know. I thought, God, but there were reasons for it. But it is, I mean, I think that evidence is there, you know, 700, and people need to think about that when they're waiting a little while for some decisions. But thank you. Jenny, sorry.
Yes, thank you, John. And you've already said thank you to Nigel, and I'd like to endorse that. And Claire Turton, who has put a tremendous amount of work into the research to prepare this paper and get it to Cabinet today. So thank you to them both. And you're quite right, 700 applications is a substantial amount to deal with. It's an eminently sensible move. It provides certainty of what is required right from the outset. It saves time for applicants, saves time for officers, and it makes sure that the applications proceed smoothly and efficiently and in a timely manner. So thank you to Nigel and Claire for bringing this. Thank you to the agents and the developers and the County Council who participated in the consultation. And obviously where amendments can be made, they have been. But thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Anyone else? No one else indicating page 113, recommendations there. There are 3. I'll move those. Seconded. Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Moving on now to, thanks Nigel. Moving on to item 10, which is the policy advisors. Mike.
Thank you, Leader. This report provides an update on the actions and activities that the policy advisors have undertaken since the last report to Cabinet in February 2021. Originally, there were 5 policy advisor positions that were created at the AGM back in May 2019. Their roles involve fact-finding, understanding how decisions are made, attending regular meetings with a portfolio holder and senior managers, and feeding back any updates, ideas and concerns as appropriate. At the AGM in May 2022, the number of policy advisors was reduced to 4, and the areas of focus were updated, but they were still delivering on their valuable workload. In July last year, 2 of the policy advisors became Cabinet portfolio holders in the audience today, leaving just 2 policy advisors at the present time. Leader, I don't intend to go through the action and achievements for each policy advisor, but the details are listed in paragraph 1.8 of the report for information. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And also, I know some people that seem to like the idea of policy advisors, but I'm afraid if all the ones that are leading, all the portfolio holders, somebody drops off the perch, and I hope that doesn't happen, but at least somebody's got some idea on what's going off in that portfolio. And I'm quite pleased with the work they've done. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a comment. Yeah, Jenny, and then Viv.
Yes, thank you. Just on the policy advisor for growth and regeneration, Councillor Nayak did quite a lot of work with the rural communities and looked how we could support those and looked at the concept of hubs. Clearly something that we're going to be looking at to take forward. And I think that's going to be part of the shared prosperity funding and see how we can use that. But I don't think it's actually mentioned here. I can't quite see it. But there was a report produced and Julie did do an awful lot of work on that particular area. So.
Thank you. We'll double check that. We can put an addition to it. Thank you. Viv.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to, again, raise my thanks to, I think there have been really innovative ways of other members of the council supporting portfolio holders, and I think they're a really useful role in succession planning as well, building the confidence up, sharing out some of the responsibilities and working alongside portfolio holders. I'd like to formally thank Councillor Fox. I think she's done a tremendous job supporting me with some really important work around equalities, strategy and plan, and also the work we've done with young people. So I really would like to thank Councillor Fox, but I also would like to thank Councillor Ron McCrossan as well, because I know as a policy holder, before he became portfolio, that he did a tremendous amount of work in terms of supporting Councillor Barnes. But I just think they're really, really good positions, and I think all credit to you as leader and to Michael as deputy leader for really creating those roles. So thank you.
Thank you. No further comments? I'll move a recommendation on page 177. That is to note the content of the report. I'll move that. Agreed. Agreed. Moving on to item 11, which is the update on council surveillance systems and policy document. Wow. Bran, that's a good subject.
Yeah. Thank you, Leader. The purpose of the report is to update members on work that has been undertaken and work that will be undertaken in relation to the governance and use of the council's surveillance systems across the organisation. It also seeks approval of amendments to the Council's policy and code of practice, which in particular takes into account an update to the government's CCTV code of practice from January 2022. And a further recommendation to appoint a senior responsible officer who will have authority to approve any additional CCTV equipment installed in the borough in consultation with portfolio holder. Members may recall a report was brought to Cabinet in March 2020. In fact, I think it was the last face-to-face meeting before the, or certainly one of the last face-to-face meetings before the COVID-19 pandemic. In that report, the recommendation was brought forward to approve a new council CCTV code of practice and policy document. The document recommended annual reports to members in relation to the operation of the council's surveillance systems. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and changes in structures and the departure of the senior responsible officer, there was no report brought forward to members in 2021 and 22. That's not to say that work did not continue in relation to good governance of the council's surveillance systems. The single point of contact for our CCTV systems, Kevin Neelan, who's sitting in the back of the room today, has continued to effectively operate the council's CCTV systems and ensure compliance with the approval process for the introduction of new cameras, where sign-off is given at director level in consultation with the executive. In January 2022, the government announced an update to its Code of Practice and CCTV policy document. Following that, a review has been undertaken of the Council's own CCTV policy document, and there are proposed amendments to that document to reflect those changes. In particular, reference to considering equality impacts on the installation of new CCTV systems is recommended in the policy document. Also strengthening the commitment to ensure the ongoing technical capability of those CCTV systems to ensure that, particularly when they're deployed for the use of prevention and detection of crime, that the images taken from those cameras are of a quality that would then be usable in prosecution proceedings. Also, there's further greater emphasis placed on the consideration of human rights implications on the utilisation of surveillance camera systems. Also, the new CCTV system at Arnold Marketplace is now included and referred to in that policy. Finally, referenced in the policy is an update to the role of senior responsible officer. The proposed officer to take up this role is the Director of Corporate Resources and Section 151 officer. She currently acts as the Council's Senior Information Risk Owner and is responsible for compliance with information governance, and as such it seemed appropriate that she was also took responsibility in relation to the Council's CCTV governance arrangements. This role is supported by the single point of contact for CCTV, who ensures good governance and operational level in terms of the CCTV systems. Since the last report to Cabinet, there has been ongoing audits of the Council's surveillance systems. Audits of all our leisure centre systems have been undertaken, also the Council's town centre CCTV system, the reception area CCTV system, and the new system installed at Arnold Marketplace. The audits check the operation of the cameras and looks at the processes for storing, handling and accessing data recorded from the cameras to our CCTV control room or other control locations. In order to support the officers who have control of those CCTV systems going forward, and in order to ensure that they are complying with the policy and indeed kept fully up to date with changes in CCTV code of practice, it's been agreed that the single point of contact will establish a working group for officers who are maintaining CCTV systems, so they can ensure that they're all working together, that they are complying with the policy, and that any changes or updates to those systems are then considered in terms of their equality impacts, the data protection impacts arising from them. Finally, in the report, we've highlighted some of the positive outcomes from the use of our council's CCTV systems over the last year. In 2022, there were 25 incidents recorded by the CCTV control room where CCTV was used to prevent and detect crime. This included assaults, possession of a bladed article, a number of public order incidents, shoplifting, drink driving and fly tipping. In addition, CCTV evidence was used to find 6 missing people, and 89 evidential discs were produced for the police or the council to use in enforcement proceedings and prosecutions. just a short capture there of how beneficial the systems are in terms of their objective in preventing and detecting crime. I should also add that since 2020, there have been 4 additional CCTV cameras added to the council's town centre system. And also, CCTV operatives also undertook RIPA training in September 2022, just to ensure that they are using the CCTV cameras in an appropriate way and that they're in no way being used for any kind of unlawful or covert surveillance without appropriate approvals in place. So, Leader, the recommendations are at the first page of the report. As I said, just to note the work that's been taken and that will be undertaken going forward, to approve the updates to the Council's policy and code of practice, and to designate the Director of Corporate Resources as the senior responsible officer for CCTV. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. David.
Thank you, Leader, and thanks to Fran for the report. The policy changes proposed are all sensible, and I'd like to recognise Kevin's role as Spock, keeping overall sight of the town centre's CCTV systems, but now extending it into our other systems. And I think he's gradually trying to bring those some of the smaller systems into line. I think the town centre systems are evidence of good practice. Some of the other ones need tightening up as well. I mean, I think we're increasingly moving to a surveillance system with ring doorbells, with private CCTV, with the amount of citizen journalists you find around. And I suppose in some ways I'm an old-fashioned liberal in that I think people ought to be able to go about their business untrammelled, their lawful business. But I think we can assure people that the CCTV, the town centre CCTV cameras that we operate and that we've extended are all only installed when they're justified and when it's a proportionate response to the nature of the society and the need. And we certainly have evidence from the police, as Fran's outlined, that they are really appreciated and they are a really good tool in tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Kevin, do you want to say anything?
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. Yes, just to confirm that the Arnold Town Centre system is going from strength to strength. There's been a number of developments. I've been working with colleagues in the legal department to ensure that the outlying cameras, satellite cameras in leisure centres and the Arnold Marketplace are going to be brought up to the same standard as the Town Centre CCTV system. We're going to be setting up a working group. It's an exciting time moving forward for surveillance at Gedling Borough Council, so to speak. So yes, I'm hoping with the support of this report and the new code of practice, things can only go from strength to strength. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Michael?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Councillor Ellis said in commending particularly Kevin, but the wider team for the work. And, you know, I would just say this. I recognise there is a balance to be struck here between surveillance and people's human rights, but we should never, ever, as a council, hesitate to use CCTV to stamp out antisocial behaviour, a small non-law-abiding minority ruining it for the rest of people in society. Kevin knows I'm contending with an issue in my ward at the moment in St Mary's around Red Hill, where we've had a church wall that has stood there since 1776 desecrated by a whole line of graffiti tags. And I'm a resident of Red Hill, and there are residents who live opposite it who are absolutely sick and tired of a non-law-abiding minority ruining it for the majority. They have vandalised the children's play park there. They're scurrying around on the field on motorbikes that possibly are not licensed or taxed. And I'm sorry to say, you know, and this is not a reflection of individual police officers or some of the brilliant teams that we've got here locally in Gedling, they do not always get a response from the police to antisocial behaviour as a result of reductions in frontline police that we've seen over the last decade by the government. Both of our police stations closed. And I think Kevin and his team, the CCTV team, the neighbourhood wardens, the environmental health officers, the public protection team, our parks and street care team at the council do a very, very good job of trying to fill the gap left by the reductions in funding we've seen to our police. But in my view, we have to be tough on these issues, and where we find them, we have to root them out, and where we find those who are responsible, they should be brought to justice, and they should be made to recompense for the damage they've done to our local communities. Because the people who pay the price for this at the end of the day are the hard-working taxpayers who live in our borough. So I think David's right. You know, improving the systems, updating the systems, making sure that they're at the standard that are needed for evidence. Of course, there should be a clear justification where we put in CCTV, but we should strain every single sinew to find where people are causing antisocial behaviour and ruining it for the law-abiding majority, because it makes people's lives, you know this, Leader, as somebody who chaired the police authority for 12 years, this sort of low-level antisocial behaviour makes people's lives a misery, and it's not acceptable. And I don't think people have any truck with these people, and I think they want to see them punished, found, brought to justice and punished, and we should play our part in that as a local authority.
Thanks, Michael. And that's a clear message there that, law-abiding people, I've said it before, is that our gang's bigger than yours, and this assists us, it assists the police. It also, not only dealing with that awful, I know you've got this horrible tagging at the moment, which seems to have appeared again, is the fact the missing people. I think it's as many as half a dozen people or more have been found through this. We see lots of people sometimes, unfortunately today, with dementia, etc., wandering around the streets, and somebody will report these people, and they've just gone on a walk, and but 4 hours later they're missing, and they've been picked up there. But thanks to you, thanks to Lee, is it in the CCTV box, because we go back a long way, don't we? Really, I think we were using semaphore before across this great ridge of Mapley Top. And the technology wasn't there, but you've seen it through. And I think when he finally finishes, he'll be hanging onto the door like that, because it's his baby. It really is impressive. And it should send a shudder at those who think they're going to get away with it, and they won't get away with it. And I think a recent one of that was some of the CCTV, albeit used from the city, that put away the thugs that came from Leicester for that fight. Were not necessarily Leicester City fans, but people who just purely wanted to fight, and they were banged away because of CCTV. We had, unfortunately, murders and some attacks when we were really having problems in Netherfield. And I remember once it came down there on the main street, and I think it was our CCTV evidence, which is admissible in law, was used. And somebody was subsequently convicted. You never get any justice for that, but there was some justice for the families that were left. So I'll move that report. There are 3 items here, 1, 2 and 3 on that recommendation. I move it. Seconded. We are agreed. Thank you. Sorry, David seconded it. Right, and I think that nearly brings us to the end. It's just something I want to request of your chief is, you see I've got the colours of Ukraine on today. A reminder that next week, I think the Prime Minister has asked for a 1-minute silence. I would like to see, as similar to Remembrance Day, to go out onto the front, if possible, those that are in the building, around the building, just to remember, because no doubt there'll be a present coming from Putin across, but it won't be very friendly to Ukraine, but to remind people we are there, we're still there for them, and we still try and help in any way. And at the same time, when we have the thought for the day before the next meeting, which is the budget meeting, just to ask the chaplain just to say a few words, not only about that, but about the awful things that's in Syria and Turkey. Also to thank all those people, particularly Muslim hands and people like that, have put tremendous effort. What's the French one? I can't, just Frontiers, is it something? Yeah. The people like that, these are very, very brave people. And I know I applied to go to join one of these once, and they wouldn't let me go because I've got a young family. But, there is passion out there, and lots of people have just gone off their own bat to do these things. So if you can do that, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you. No other further items? We'll close the meeting. Thanks.